Hello. This story proves that even the ignored possess a power that can change everything. Comment below. What would you do in her shoes? Have you ever walked past someone so invisible that they almost seemed like a part of the world around you? A fleeting figure, blending into the background, unnoticed, unimportant. Someone who fades into the shadows as if their existence doesn't matter. It was the early hours of the morning. The sun had yet to rise, casting a soft gray hue over the city streets. While most people were still lost in the comfort of their warm beds, there was one woman who was already at work. She stood there in the quiet emptiness of Galen Industries' towering headquarters, mopping floors, wiping windows, cleaning up the messes left behind by the people who were long gone. Her name? Leora. But to everyone who passed by her, she was just a janitor, a nameless face, a servant to the cold metallic world of corporate greed and profit. She moved with precision, like a well-oiled machine, never seen, never heard, always invisible to the world that surrounded her. No one looked her in the eye. No one stopped to ask her name. To them, she was nothing more than background noise, a worker to be overlooked, a task to be done. But what they didn't know, what they could never have known, was that Leora was not just any janitor. She wasn't a cog in the machine. She wasn't someone to be forgotten. Behind her faded uniform and tired expression, she carried a secret so powerful, so dangerous. It had the potential to bring everything crashing down. This wasn't just a woman scrubbing floors. This was the heir to the empire, the heir to Galen Industries, the estranged daughter of the company's ruthless founder, the one who had rejected everything they thought they knew about her, the one who had walked away from the wealth, the power, the luxury, disgusted by the corruption, the greed, and the hollow emptiness that had consumed her family's legacy. For years, Leora had stayed hidden in the shadows, watching from afar as her father's empire grew, decaying from the inside out, its foundation built on lies and exploitation. But now things were changing. Leora had spent years in silence, learning, observing, waiting. From the very building that bore her family's name, she watched the people who thought they owned the world. She listened to their secrets. She understood their weaknesses. They thought they had control. They thought they were untouchable. They thought she was just another worker, disposable, invisible. But what they didn't know was that Leora's silence was not a weakness. It was her strength. Because she wasn't waiting for revenge. She wasn't driven by hate. She wasn't angry at the world for what it had taken from her. Leora had a far more dangerous plan. A plan that didn't need violence or destruction. A plan that required only one thing: patience. She would wait. Wait until the right moment arrived, and when it did, when the world around her began to unravel, they would understand. Not just the people in her company, but the world itself. They would understand that Leora Galen was not someone to be underestimated, that she was not someone to be ignored, because in the end, she was not just a janitor. She was the rightful heir, the one who would take back what was hers, and the world would learn to respect her or fall before her. The days passed, each one a mirror of the last. Leora continued her work, her hands moving mechanically as she swept the floors and cleaned the windows, always beneath the radar, always invisible. She had mastered the art of blending in, of going unnoticed. as if she were just another part of the background. A faint memory that would dissolve the moment anyone looked away. But in those quiet moments, when she was alone in the halls of the towering building, when the noise of the city faded into silence, Leora would stop for a moment. She would look out at the skyline, her eyes lingering on the city below, the sprawling streets that held the power, the wealth, the broken dreams of so many. And for a brief instant, she allowed herself to remember the child she once was, the one who ran freely through the corridors of this very building, the one who used to dream of changing the world, of making it a better place, before the weight of her family's legacy crushed those dreams, before she was forced to leave it all behind. But the past was not something she could change. The future, however, was another story. In the darkness of the building, amidst the shadows of the people who thought they controlled everything, Leora had begun to see the cracks. Cracks in their empire, cracks in their arrogance. The higher-ups at Galen Industries had no idea what was coming. Their constant scheming, their manipulations, their lies. It all seemed so flawless from the outside. But beneath the polished surface, the cracks were growing larger. And Leora was there, hidden in the shadows, waiting to exploit them. Every conversation she overheard, every secret she uncovered, every flaw she identified, it all became a part of her plan. A plan that was slowly, carefully unfolding. No one suspected a thing. To them, she was just the janitor, the quiet, unassuming woman who never said a word, who never made a scene. But Leora wasn't there to make scenes. She was there to change the game. The day would come when she would walk into that boardroom, when she would sit at the head of the table, when they would look at her, finally seeing her and realize that they had underestimated the one person who could destroy them. She was not just a daughter, she was the future, and she had waited long enough. The air was thick with anticipation. Leora had spent countless hours in the darkened corners of the building, learning everything she could. From the quiet whispers in the break rooms to the secretive meetings behind closed doors. Every detail was vital. Every word spoken, every gesture made, was a clue she collected and stored away in her mind. She wasn't just learning the layout of the building. She was learning the people, their weaknesses, their fears, their desires. The executives at Galen Industries walked past her every day, oblivious to her presence. Some would nod in passing, others would ignore her completely, as if she were invisible. But Leora knew the truth. She had become a part of the building itself, a ghost in the shadows, moving unnoticed while everyone else played their part. And like any good ghost, she was always watching. Her eyes lingered on the men and women in suits, their laughter echoing in the halls, their words filled with promises of power and money, of domination and control. They thought they had everything. They thought they were untouchable. But they didn't know Leora. One afternoon, while pushing her mop across the polished floors, she overheard a conversation that would change everything. A voice, deep and smooth, floated from the corner office where the CEO, Simon Hale, held his meetings. Leora froze, her heart beating a little faster as she tried to make sense of the words. Everything's in place. The merger's happening next month. Once we take over, we'll have the entire tech sector in our grasp. The voice belonged to James Alden, a senior executive, one of the key players in the company's rise to power. And those words, Those words set off a chain of thoughts in Leora's mind. A merger, a takeover. It all made sense now. The whispers, the secrecy. It was all part of their bigger plan. Leora's fingers tightened around the mop handle, the weight of the knowledge sinking in. She had always known they were ruthless, but this was something else entirely. They weren't just interested in the power they already had. They wanted more, much more. And in their pursuit of that power, they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated her. With the new information in hand, Leora retreated into the depths of the building, finding solace in her tiny office, a forgotten corner of the company. There, away from prying eyes, she allowed herself to think. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. The merger was the key. But how could she use it? How could she turn the tables in her favor? The answer was closer than she realized. In that moment, Leora understood. She wasn't just a janitor, she was the catalyst, the spark that could ignite the fire. The next few weeks were spent preparing, quietly gathering intel, carefully watching the movements of the executives and staff. She knew she had to be patient, to wait for the right moment. The walls of the building were full of secrets, but the people within it were even more fragile. And Leora, she was ready to exploit that weakness. Days passed, and Leora's movements became even more deliberate. Each piece of information she gathered, each conversation she overheard, only fueled her resolve. She had spent years as nothing more than a shadow, an unseen figure cleaning up after those who thought they were invincible. But now, she was the one shaping the narrative. One small step at a time. She had learned to blend in, to become invisible in plain sight. The company's halls felt like a labyrinth to most, but to her, they were a map, a collection of secrets waiting to be unlocked. Leora knew when to listen, when to act, and when to retreat. She knew how to manipulate the systems they had built, how to use their own arrogance against them. The boardroom had always been a place of power, where the most dangerous minds met. But Leora had no intention of entering as an outsider. She would become a part of that world, slipping unnoticed into their conversations, planting the seeds of doubt and disruption. One afternoon, she overheard a critical exchange between two executives, Sarah and Mark. They were discussing the upcoming merger, the final steps before they would move to seize control of the tech sector. Leora leaned in, her heart racing, as she caught words that could prove to be her key to unraveling their plans. They're pushing for more, faster than expected. We need to act now, or we risk losing everything. The public isn't ready for this kind of shift. Mark's voice was shaky, filled with a hint of fear. Sarah, however, remained calm, her confidence unshaken. It's too late to stop it now. We push forward, no matter the cost. We're untouchable. Leora's mind raced. They were already starting to feel the pressure. The cracks were beginning to show. But they wouldn't expect someone like her to be the one to exploit it. She knew the stakes were higher than ever. This wasn't just about a merger. It was about more than power or money. It was about control over lives, over futures. And she wouldn't let them get away with it. Late at night, when the building was nearly empty and silence enveloped the hallways, Leora returned to the heart of the company's operations. The servers, the financial records, the documents that detailed every transaction. They were all within her reach. For the first time, she wasn't just a janitor. She was a player in the game. Leora's fingers hovered over the keyboard, her eyes scanning the network. She knew this system better than anyone. With a few keystrokes, she could bring the entire operation to a halt, could expose their darkest secrets. But she had to be careful. One wrong move and everything could crumble. The stakes were too high to rush. Her mind flashed back to the conversations she had overheard. She had learned about their plans, their desires, their fears, and now she would use it against them. Her first target would be Simon Hale, the CEO, the one who had orchestrated everything from the beginning. If she could take him down, if she could expose him for the manipulative, ruthless leader he truly was, the rest of the company would fall in line. But it wasn't just about Simon. It was about showing them all the power they had underestimated in her. She wasn't invisible anymore. The next few days were filled with meticulous planning. Leora knew she couldn't afford to make mistakes. She started to plant the seeds of distrust, dropping subtle hints in the right places, speaking to those who would listen. She wasn't alone in this fight. There were others, people who had been overlooked, who had been silenced by the system. They would help her bring down the giants. She'd already begun to form an underground network. Silent allies in the shadows, just like her. They weren't ready to take on an entire company yet, but they would, one step at a time. And with every passing hour, the walls of Galen Industries seemed to grow more fragile. The great machine they had built, the empire they thought was untouchable, was starting to show signs of weakness. Leora could feel it in the air, a shift, a change coming. And this time, it wasn't just the company she was targeting. It was the entire system that had kept her in the shadows for so long. Her plan was almost ready. Soon, they would all know her name. As days turned into weeks, Leora's plan began to take shape in ways she had never anticipated. The more she worked in the shadows, the more she realized the magnitude of the beast she was facing. Galen Industries was more than a corporation. It was a living, breathing entity that had its claws in every aspect of society. But that didn't matter to Leora. She was playing a different game now, one where the rules were hers to make. She had learned how to use the company's own tactics against them, divide and conquer. Leora planted misinformation, created small rifts between departments, sowing seeds of doubt that slowly began to erode the once unified front of the executives. She could feel the tension in the air, like a storm that was gathering, ready to unleash its fury. The boardroom, once a place of calculated confidence, had become a battlefield. Even the most composed individuals were showing signs of cracks. Leora smiled to herself as she watched the pieces fall into place. But as the weeks passed, she noticed something else, an unexpected ally. It was Sarah, the very woman who had once been so confident, so in control, was beginning to doubt herself. Leora had been keeping a close eye on her, and it became clear that Sarah was no longer fully aligned with the company's direction. She seemed torn between loyalty to the empire she had helped build and the growing sense of unease that was creeping into her mind. And Leora knew that now, more than ever, she needed to approach Sarah carefully. One evening, when the office was nearly empty, Leora found Sarah in the company lounge, standing alone, staring out at the city lights. The tension between them was palpable, but this was an opportunity Leora couldn't let slip by. She walked up to Sarah, her footsteps soft against the marble floors. "Sarah," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Sarah turned slowly, surprised, as if she hadn't expected anyone to be there. Leora continued, "You're not happy with what's happening, are you?" For a moment, Sarah said nothing, her eyes narrowing as if trying to gauge Leora's intentions. But then, in a quiet voice, she spoke. "You have no idea what you're talking about." But there was a tremor in her voice, one that Leora didn't miss. "I think I do," Leora replied. "I've seen it in your eyes, the doubt, the fear." Sarah's gaze shifted, as if she was considering the possibility that someone like Leora, might understand. "I've given everything to this company," Sarah said, her voice almost breaking. "But it's all falling apart. It's not what we were promised." Leora nodded. "I know. But it doesn't have to be this way. You don't have to keep carrying the weight of this corruption." For a long moment, Sarah remained silent, her face a mixture of conflict and vulnerability. Then, finally, she spoke again, this time with a hint of resolve in her voice. "Maybe it's time for a change." This was the turning point Leora had been waiting for. Sarah was no longer an enemy. She was a potential ally, and with Sarah's help, Leora's plan could move forward with greater speed and precision. But they had to move carefully. Trust was fragile, and Sarah was still walking a fine line between loyalty and rebellion. Over the next few days, Leora and Sarah exchanged information, carefully orchestrating their moves. Sarah had access to the company's most sensitive data, and Leora had the knowledge of the vulnerabilities within the system. Together, they began to piece together a plan to bring down Simon Hale, the CEO who had orchestrated the entire corrupt structure. But it wouldn't be easy. Simon was ruthless, and the board members who still supported him would stop at nothing to protect their empire. Leora knew that exposing Simon's true nature would take more than just information. It would require a spectacle. It would need to be something that couldn't be ignored, something that would shake the foundations of Galen Industries to its core. And she knew just how to do it. The final piece of her plan came to her one night, as she stared at the glowing screen in front of her. It was a recording, one she had stolen from the company's vault. It was a video of Simon Hale speaking with a foreign investor, one that would prove his involvement in illegal dealings, bribery, and corporate espionage. The evidence was irrefutable, and Leora knew that this would be the weapon she needed to take him down. She called Sarah that night, her voice low. "Are you ready?" "I'm ready," Sarah responded, her voice steady but tinged with anticipation. "It's time to expose the truth," Leora said. As the days drew closer to the moment when everything would come to light, the weight of what they were about to do settled heavily on Leora's shoulders. She had spent years in the shadows, playing a role no one had asked her to play. But now she was taking control, and there was no going back. The final act was almost upon them. The final moment arrived like the calm before the storm. Leora sat in her dimly lit apartment, staring at the glowing screen in front of her, her hands trembling ever so slightly. She had everything she needed, the video, the evidence. And now, Sarah by her side, ready to move forward with their dangerous plan. There was no turning back. This was it. With one last deep breath, Leora opened her encrypted email, attaching the video of Simon Hale in the compromising conversation. She hit send, her finger hovering over the mouse for just a moment longer than necessary. The weight of the action bore down on her. The moment the video reached the press, there would be no going back. The corporate empire Simon had built would crumble, and in its place would rise a new era. An era where corruption could no longer hide behind wealth and power. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah's voice came through the phone, quiet yet full of tension. Leora closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the gravity of what they were about to do. "I'm sure," she replied, her voice steady, but a spark of doubt flickered inside her. "Let's finish this." The next few hours felt like an eternity. Leora paced her apartment, waiting for the storm to break. She checked her phone obsessively, watching as news outlets slowly picked up the story, until, finally, the world knew what Simon Hale had been hiding. The video went viral, and the truth could no longer be denied. The walls of Galen Industries began to tremble as the public outcry exploded. The stock prices plummeted, board members scrambled, and Simon himself was forced to step down, his empire crashing down around him. Leora felt the weight lift from her chest as the chaos unfolded. But there was still more to be done. Her plan had worked, but the battle was far from over. She had torn down the walls, but now it was time to rebuild. And rebuilding wasn't just about taking down the corrupt. It was about creating something better in its place. Leora had always known that. She wasn't just seeking revenge. She was looking for redemption, for herself and for the world she had been trapped in for far too long. Days passed, and the dust began to settle. The media covered the scandal endlessly, exposing every layer of corruption that had been hidden from the public eye. But even as the world turned its attention to Galen Industries' downfall, Leora and Sarah continued to work quietly behind the scenes, pushing for the reforms that were desperately needed. They weren't done yet, not by a long shot. Leora had become a force in the world she had once feared. A leader who had taken the reins of her destiny and wasn't afraid to forge a new path. She didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in a long time, she believed that things could change. And with Sarah by her side, she knew they could make it happen. But there was one thing Leora had learned in the chaos of it all. Sometimes, to truly change the world, you have to start with the courage to change yourself. And Leora had done just that. The truth had come to light. The darkness had been pierced, and a new chapter had begun. The days following the boardroom showdown were filled with a strange kind of quiet. The once bustling halls of Galen Industries felt smaller now, as if the very walls were holding their breath. It was as if the company had been frozen in time, unable to move forward without first acknowledging the seismic shift that had just taken place. Leora took her seat at the helm with quiet authority. The board members who had once regarded her as an invisible presence now watching her with cautious eyes. She did not speak much. She didn't need to. The weight of the documents on her desk, the records of wrongdoings that had been buried for far too long, spoke louder than any words ever could. But even as she reclaimed what had been hers by right, there was a subtle ache inside her, a reminder of the cost of all of it. Justice had been served, yes, but the journey had left its mark. Her father, her mentor, the man who had once shaped her understanding of power, now stood as nothing more than a shadow of the legacy he had tried to build. Her own legacy, the one she would leave behind, was still being written. She spent hours in the boardroom poring over the papers, each decision a piece of the puzzle she was now determined to solve. It was not just about profit, about rebuilding what had crumbled under her father's reign. No, it was about something more. It was about creating something that would stand for more than just money or influence. For the first time in a long time, Leora allowed herself to think beyond the walls of the company, beyond the glass and steel of Galen Industries. She thought of the people who had worked beneath her, those who had once been invisible, like she had been, the interns who had been broken by the system, the mothers and fathers who had struggled to make ends meet, their lives twisted by the corporate greed that had poisoned the very foundation of the company. Leora had seen them all. She had listened to their stories, their pain, their dreams. And now it was time to honor them, to build something that would not only restore what had been lost, but create a place where people could thrive. The first step was simple: transparency. A commitment to integrity in every action. A promise that no one would ever again be ignored, belittled, or discarded as she had once been. The company would no longer be a machine for exploitation. It would be a place of empowerment, where justice was not just a word spoken in hushed tones, but a principle that defined everything. And with that, Leora Galen began to reshape the future of her family's legacy. She would not just tear down the old world, she would build a new one. It was a slow process. It always would be. But each decision, each new policy, each act of kindness and respect that reverberated throughout the company was a victory. It was a quiet revolution, but it was one that could not be ignored. As Leora sat alone in the boardroom, her father's empty chair at the head of the table, she allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. She had done it. She had taken the company back. But more than that, she had taken back her power, her agency, and her place in the world. And for the first time in years, she could finally breathe. But she knew the fight was not over. Not yet. The world had seen what she was capable of, and now they would watch as she continued to rewrite the story of Galen Industries, the story of a daughter who had risen from the ashes of her father's mistakes to become the architect of her own future. And so, Leora's journey became a testament not just to her resilience, but to the power of transformation. She had inherited a legacy steeped in ambition and corruption, but she had chosen to turn it into something entirely new. Something better. With every new decision, every policy that echoed her commitment to justice, the foundations of Galen Industries were no longer built on greed, but on a vision of a future where people mattered. As the months passed, the changes became apparent to everyone who walked through the company's doors. Employees no longer whispered about fear or resentment. They spoke of hope, of opportunity. Leora's presence was felt not just in the boardroom, but in every corner of the company. She was a leader who listened, who cared, and above all, who refused to accept anything less than what was right. The world outside the glass windows of the corporate towers shifted too. Competitors, once dismissive of her, now watched with interest as Galen Industries emerged from the shadows of its past. Leora's name began to be spoken with a mixture of respect and admiration, not just within the walls of her company, but in the wider world of business and leadership. Yet, Leora remained focused. She knew that true success would never be measured by accolades or public praise. It would be measured by the lives she touched, the opportunities she created, and the example she set for others. For the first time, she saw herself not just as the leader of a company, but as a beacon. A symbol of what could happen when one person dared to rewrite the rules. In the quiet of the evening, when the office lights dimmed and the sounds of the city outside grew distant, Leora would sit in her father's old chair. She would reflect on the path she had taken, the battles she had fought, and the people she had helped along the way. And in those moments, she would realize that the real victory wasn't in reclaiming her father's empire. It was in building a legacy that was entirely her own. A legacy that, like her father's, would one day be remembered. But this time, for all the right reasons. Every story leaves a mark, big or small. If this one meant something to you, take a second to share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button. More stories are waiting for you. See you soon.